Hello and welcome to Power, People and Planet. I'm Kumi Naidoo, and this is a series of candid conversations with activists, community leaders, artists and thinkers from around the world, which tackles some of the biggest challenges of our time. It is my sincere hope that you will find wisdom and knowledge here that will help you make decisions about where you put your energies in deciding how you want to make a difference to ensure that we live in a more just, more equitable, and more sustainable world for ourselves, for our children, and for their children. Favianna, thank you so much for making time to be on Power, People and Planet. Let's start at the start. So where did life start for you? I know your roots are in Peru, but you grew up in Oakland. Many of us in many parts of the world know Oakland is the home of the Black Panthers and as a very progressive place of inclusivity and so on with all its struggles. But tell us your story and your journey.
I was born in 1978, right before the explosion of the war on drugs happened in the United States. My parents are both from Peru, and they settled in a immigrant community in East Oakland, which, Oakland is a place where both Black and brown people live very much in communion. And my neighborhood was being ravaged by the drug war. And that means that there was police brutality, there was divestment from the government, there was the beginnings of mass incarceration, and of course, there was also pollution, whether it was through the fossil fuel industry or through big industry that had settled in the inner cities all throughout the country. And so I was really born at a time when communities of color were under attack and they were suffering some of the most kind of post desegregation, post Jim Crow. There was another kind of marginalizing of communities. And when I was growing up, that's what I faced. And it was very hard because I couldn't go outside. And I saw violence in many different forms at a very young age. And I just knew that something was wrong, that my community was being marginalized on purpose, that we didn't have the schools that we needed, we didn't have the services we needed. And that shaped me because what it meant is that I had to largely grow up as a kid indoors. And so my parents, who were both immigrants, they were also adapting to American culture. And I didn't see myself reflected in the culture around me. There was no Latinas on TV. Dora the Explorer had not been yet created. Selena wasn't yet alive. People didn't really know about Frida Kahlo. I didn't see Latinos represented in the media. So I very much struggled with my identity as a kid. And I think many kids of color, especially growing up in the 80s and even in the 90s, we were just starting to see ourselves represented, right? And not that representation means power, but it does mean something when you can see yourself.
You feel seen.
Yeah, you feel seen. You actually feel like you exist. But I also feel that it was that moment in history combined, with the remnants of Black Power, because Black Power had happened just a few years before, and also the birth of hip hop that made me realize that despite all the hardship that you can experience, that music and art and dancing is how you get free. And so I would also see the murals with Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta and Che Guevara. And the school that I went to taught me about the Cuban Revolution when I was in kindergarten. Like, I was learning all of this revolutionary content precisely because the conditions were so awful. So that really shaped me. Like, the fact that I really longed to see myself represented in a positive way, myself and my community, in a way where we were dignified and human. It's what propelled me to be an artist. And I was an artist since I was a kid.
In a sense, you saw already the power of arts and culture to contribute to social change. Can you give us one or two examples or struggles that you encountered in the public sphere, as a young person?
Yes, absolutely. Both of my parents instantly realized that they needed to be very protective of myself and my brother. And my childhood was full of moments when I knew that what I saw in the streets or how drugs were ravaging my community, police brutality, none of it was normal. So my parents really stressed education, and they said that I had to be number one, I had to get straight A's. And my father, who taught me how to speak in Spanish, would get me all of these books and really teach me about our culture. So early on, I was one of those kids that was in a lot of extracurricular activities. And as a result, since I was in elementary school, I was a kid that my teachers said was very bright, that I should go to a different school where talented kids go, very bright kids go. And they encouraged my mom to do everything she can so that I could get an excellent education. So when I started going to high school, the school administrators wanted to put me in English as a second language, which is essentially where they put all the immigrant kids. And even though I'm American, even though I'm getting straight A's, I was like an honor roll student in my elementary school. Just
And at this time, your
excelling.
English and your Spanish is almost
Oh
equally
yeah,
good.
perfect. But also I was being tracked, and they wanted to put me in all of these classes that were clearly not where I belonged. And so my mom had to fight and go in the face of the administrators and say, no, my daughter is going to go to regular English. In fact, she'll go to honors English. And so during my high school years, I was in some of the best courses because my mom advocated for me. But all the other Latino kids were not in my classroom. They were in English as a second language, or they were in lower level classes, and they were also being monitored by the police during lunchtime. And there had been this law that passed that if people assembled in what the administration would define as a gang, right? If you had 3 or more
Which
kids,
administration? The school
the school administration. So if 3 or 4 young men of color, Latinos or Black men, would get together, they could be profiled as gang members.
Wow.
And so I started seeing how my peers, you know, the kids I talked to, even though I wasn't in the same class with them, I would see them at lunch, and I was outraged at this. And at the same time, because I was meeting older activists who were educating me about revolution and about how to fight back, I organized the first Latino student club at my high school. And the fact that I could get, 30, 45 Latino kids to meet me for lunch and talk about organizing and challenging the school. I would put up posters in the hallway about Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez, right? The founders of the United Farm Workers Movement, that said, like, Viva la Raza. And the administration ripped my posters down. And I realized, wow, this is a racist institution. And so I got together with other older organizers who taught me how to do something called a walkout. And so in the early 90s, when California was one of the states that was the number one in incarceration,
Yes, I
and the
remember.
way they did it is through starting you in the school to prison pipeline. So in school is where they were criminalizing youth to lock them up. And so I helped lead a protest that walked out my high school.
How old were you then,
I was
Favi?
15.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's exactly how old I was when I started. I was 15 when I started my first protest.
And when I realized the power of, not just what it means to challenge public space with art, but with our voice and with our body, that is when I was like, wow, I want to not just be an artist, I want to be an artist activist.
The one wisdom that seems to prevail here, what doesn't kill you makes you strong. And clearly all these experiences have made you strong. I want to take you to the way art is seen. Why do you believe that art and storytelling are vital? Indeed, you would probably agree with me that it's indispensable to every social movement. So why today, especially given where we are, and let's be blunt about it, we never thought we'd be in this disastrous situation where we're seeing a rollback on democracy, on efforts at diversity, equity and inclusion, on LGBTIQ rights, and much more. So why do you think every social movement needs to embrace in much deeper and organic ways than they have done so far the power of arts and culture?
Yeah. Well, one is, as human beings, we have been creating culture since the beginning of time. We've been sitting around fires, telling stories and drawing on caves and dancing and beating our drum. It is in our human nature to express ourselves, and culture is what makes us human. And the stories that we transmit through culture teach us how to be human. They teach us about our gender, they teach us about our race, about our responsibility to the natural world. And so culture shapes our imaginations and shows us what's possible. So when the culture, A, does not reflect you, or B, dehumanizes you, then we have a problem. And the problem, of course, is that white supremacist culture, colonial culture, is our norm at the global level, right? The dehumanization of people of color, of dark skinned people, of women, of gay people, of trans people, disabled people is normalized throughout our culture. And of course, there's been periods when it's been a lot worse. But even today, where we thought that there was progress, when you look at who's controlling Hollywood and the music industry, it continues to be in the 90, 80 percentile of white men. So these stories that we're being entertained by and the music we're listening to is actually created by the minority of who lives in the world. And that is going to create problems no matter how you cut it. And so we need culture, one, to remind us that we are human and to help us align with the values that we want, the values of justice and liberation and freedom. And throughout the world today, what is the norm is extractivism. It's the extractive economy, which in order to have dig, burn, dump, you need to exploit people, you need to steal their land, and you need to exploit Mother Earth.
And you also have to extract their culture.
Yes, you have to extract their culture, their ancestral wisdom.
And commodify it and commercialize it.
Yes, exactly. You have to commodify it, and then you need militaristic systems to enforce order. Now, the mindset that we need in order for that to function is one of consumerism and colonialism. And that is that we have to accept our fate, we have to stay in line and not question. But that is also the culture that is perpetuated for us to be good consumers. There's a culture that's perpetuated that tells us that it's okay to extract because you need energy now and you need to consume, and consuming is normal. And so we need another kind of culture that puts us in right relationship to nature and teaches us instead to value sacredness, the sacredness of life, and to care for each other. And those things are not normalized in our culture. We don't have a culture of care. We have a culture of human beings needing to pay for every single aspect of their existence, right? Racial capitalism. And we can't have a movement where we have a shift in policy unless we first have a shift in the way people think. And the way that they will shift how they think is if you speak to them emotionally, if you speak to their emotions and really to their DNA, because I think these stories are inside of our hearts. They need to be reactivated through music and through art. And I would say the last thing is that why art is so powerful is because it's not limited by what's politically feasible. And so even though in the United States, it might be impossible for us to imagine that we're going to get an immigration reform bill or that we're going to see any kind of victories for women or people of color under this administration. It's not politically feasible, but we can still create fantasy and futurism through art. And that will radicalize people, because once people can see what's possible and they feel it, they're going to want it and they're going to fight for it. And so this is why we need arts and culture.
Well, in a very real way, what's missing most right now is an absence of a sense of imagination. One of the powerful things about arts and culture has always been artists have helped us to imagine futures yet to be born. And right now, when things look so dire and we see fascism on the rise, we see rollback on gender equity and so on, we have to help people imagine that actually it doesn't have to be this way, it can change. Right. But one of the things that you've said, which is really interesting and thought-provoking, is when you say that culture is as necessary as policy.
Yes.
Right? How do you define cultural power, And why do you see it as a foundational force for shifting people's hearts and mind? And why is it more important than policy?
Well, one thing my mentors taught me when I first started to organize is they taught me what kinds of powers exist and how we can move those levers of power. So there is people power, and people power can play out in the political sector, right? The people we elect, the people that govern us. The way that we govern is very important. The way that we govern and that we create laws really reflects the values that are normalized in that society. And so, if we have a society that values its elders and values the wellness of all of its citizens, then you'll see things like universal health care. We also have the economic sector because there's money power. And we have a economic sector that is disproportionately powerful because of capitalism and because how corporations today can dictate everything from the quality of water we drink to the air we breathe to the wages that we get paid. And then there is the power of culture, the power of imagination, and that is also a lever of change. And if we doubt the power of culture, then we just have to look at how regimes throughout history have gone after the artists first. If we think about Reagan and how he destroyed the National Endowment for the Arts in the United States, we're still experiencing the effects of that. In fact, the new administration has gone after arts. They go after language. They go after critical race theory, which is another form of culture because it's how we keep our stories. Critical race theory is essentially history, and history is about the stories that get told and the stories that don't get told. And of course, there's another kind of power, which is earth power. My mentors would always say there is a power bigger than all of us, and that is the power of the earth. And that, no matter how sophisticated your buildings are, that when a flood comes, there's nothing more powerful than that. And so in the United States, there has been investment in organizing political power. The nonprofit structure that exists in this country is not that old. It was born in 1969, and we saw investment in the era of civil rights, right? People fighting for the right to vote, for desegregation. There was definitely no investment in culture back then. People were not supporting Nina Simone or James Baldwin. They all had to leave.
Yeah, they were in the periphery.
Yeah, because arts was not seen as something that needed to be supported, except if you were in the opera or if you were the ballet or if you were, these large orchestras, then yes, you were getting money. But that's because white people here wanted a way to differentiate themselves from the Europeans. So they invested in white American culture, which is all stolen from Black people. But in the US, as we had these movements grow and we had an investment in the political arm, we did not think about how we could invest in culture, which is another lever of change. And so I have this graph, this image that shows it's a triangle, and culture is at the top, politics is on the left, and economics is on the right. And so it's the triangle of social change. And in any of those spaces, those can influence other spaces, but culture can strongly influence both.
I saw how that resonated when you did the keynote
Yeah.
address to the inaugural Global Activism Conference in September when you presented that.
Mhm.
It resonated both with the intellectuals, the community organizers, the artists, and so on. And we are seeing a shift, certainly in philanthropy, but also on the side of campaigning organizations. What I would say is that mainstream activists, it's not like they didn't know that culture and arts and music and everything had an important impact. But the way they embraced it historically, I would put it in a very technocratic way, right?
Mhm.
Or, the way I used to experience it when I used to come to the US, if, like, say, the Council on Foundations or independent sector had a big annual meeting, they would have somebody perform at the opening session and somebody
Exactly.
perform at the closing session, and a box that was ticked
Yeah.
that, okay, we took care of culture. But things are changing.
Mhm.
And yeah, I would like to just ask you to share maybe one example or two where you think culture preceded policy changes.
Oh, wow. Culture has always preceded political change. But I'll give you two examples. So, first is in the legalization of gay marriage and in all the laws that protect LGBTQ people in the United States. And I would say globally, because American culture has been exported throughout the world. In 1996, the Defense of Marriage Act was passed by Bill Clinton, which said that marriage was between a man and a woman. A few years before that, GLAAD had organized to tell the Associated Press to stop using the word homosexual in their reporting and instead use the word gay. They were also lobbying Hollywood to create stories about gay people. Ellen DeGeneres came out on TV in 1997, 1 year after the Defense of Marriage Act was passed. After that, you had Will and Grace, you
Yes, I
had Queer
remember.
Eye, you had the L Word, you had for the first time in 2013 a gay man on the cover of Sports Illustrated, the first gay athlete on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And what followed? In 2013, Orange is the New Black, you had the first Black trans character on television, right? By 2015, when you polled Americans, most of them supported gay marriage. And when gay marriage went to the Supreme Court, by then it was already a culturally accepted idea because culture had normalized it, right? There was plays about the life of Matthew Shepard,
Yep.
who was the kid in Wyoming who was dragged to his death. And if you look at it from a trans perspective, after Orange is the New Black, you had Janet Mock, you had Laverne Cox on the cover of Time magazine, just like Ellen DeGeneres was on the cover of Time magazine. You had shows like Pose that showed transgender people and their stories. And in the United States, you also could see that young people were identifying as non-binary at rates that you could just see the chart go up and up and up. The political backlash that we're seeing right now against trans people is because the right had tested and had seen who they could go after to mobilize their base. And they found that going after trans kids in sports was how they get to the parents. And so I want to just differentiate. One is that we do have political wins, but we also have political backlashes because today you have right wingers who want to undo the Supreme Court decision. They want to challenge gay marriage, just like they want to challenge affirmative action. But culture doesn't go backwards. Like trans people are not going to disappear. And in fact, it's going to embolden people to be themselves even more. So culture is always going to be ahead of politics. We will feel some backlashes, but we are not going to go back. And I would say the second thing is the creation of Earth Day in 1970. The creation of Earth Day, within 5 years, you had so many laws passed in the United States, the Wildlife Protection Act, the Clean Water Act, which just got rolled back in the Supreme Court. You had extinction acts, you had the creation of the EPA. And all of this linked to the fact that we had a cultural signifier that celebrated the earth. Very simple. And if you even think about how it is that we all began to associate this little globe that we see, you know how we see that? Is because in 1969, somebody took a photo of Earth from the moon. And there was a whole movement of those astronauts who realized that they're human beings. It changed their life. And so I believe that the image is powerful. When we look at what ignited the anti-Vietnam movement, it was the photo of the young girl running from napalm.
Yep.
Right? You know how the abolitionists were able to organize against slavery? They commissioned an illustration of the boats from the transatlantic slave trade. So the image, the ability to capture a song or a story, or when, it was Paul Simon, who had come back from South Africa after hearing about the story of Steve Biko. And, he told Bruce Springsteen's drummer. And Bruce Springsteen's drummer went on a covert mission to South Africa. And he was like in the back of someone's truck. And he was so appalled that he came back and he organized artists against apartheid.
Wow.
And then they went on to sing Sun City.
Yeah.
So I love artists for that because artists are just like bold and powerful. And that's exactly why we need culture.
So are you anxious about the moment we find ourselves in terms of Trump revoking diversity, equity, and inclusion policies? corporations doing the same. Not all, but quite a few. This appears to be a backlash or backsliding. So how do we prevent this or mitigate it, particularly from an artistic point of view?
Well, first, Trump was successful because the right wing invested so heavily in culture.
Absolutely.
They go big in culture. I mean, they fund radio, podcasts, books, and they give people money to fail. I mean, millions to little rinky-dink creators who then go on to make huge operations. So we have to first accept that the cultural war is real and our opposition is very skilled at it. And a lot of what they're doing, they learned it from us. They are still the minority, though. And I think that this is what we have to remember, is that they are a minority with a large microphone. And we could also uplift and disseminate the voices and the cultural creations of people who speak to our emotions. I mean, this is the work that you and I are doing. We're trying to say we need to invest. At the same time, we need to move faster. We need to go big and trust artists. Part of my frustration, especially seeing really the excellent cultural strategies that the right is doing, even this idea of make America great again, it is such an appeal.
Formulation,
It is, I mean, the red hats, the little Band-Aid on the ear, like all of these, it reminds me of how powerful it was when the Panthers had a fro and a black leather jacket and the fist, right? Culture of belonging and of being part of a vision for the future is so compelling. And we did not have that. I'm a leftist and I love to understand what we did wrong. And I think we did not create a bold enough vision at scale for the world we want to see. Even at the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, I would say 60, 70% of what Kamala Harris said was insulting Donald Trump. And at the same time, having billionaires on the stage. What is the message we're sending? What about a commitment to have universal health care, a commitment to align with workers? Where was our vision? What's our story?
Well, when I was Secretary General of Amnesty from 2018 to 2020, I used to, on stages when I was speaking, I used to say, I strongly agree with Steve Bannon. And everybody would think, what the hell is this guy going to say? I say Steve Bannon as something we don't have in terms of understanding, which is he understands better and has understood for a long time that culture drives politics.
Yeah.
Politics does not drive culture. And quite often, progressive, liberal, left-leaning people and so on seem to be thinking that politics actually drives culture. And that's been a cardinal error that we've made. So how do you see the role of art in activism, particularly today, in mobilizing young people for climate and social justice? Because today, what I'm seeing around the world is that young people are facing a massive mental health crisis.
Yes.
They're struggling with eco-anxiety and climate anxiety. And as you know, in our family, we've had very personal loss of a young, talented person who left us at the age of 34. Young people have every reason to sort of be freaking out at the madness coming from adult political leaders right now. But how can art and culture be mobilized in a way that it's actually almost offering an antidote to despair and an antidote to pessimism?
So what the arts offers is for young people to express themselves, to tell their stories and to be seen and have a sense of belonging. I have taught everything from graffiti art classes to poster making classes. And when young people have the space to share their wisdom and to create, whether it's music or visual art or to make something, it is so empowering. And so we need more spaces for young people to create, but also to see themselves as active players in shaping our society. I also think that on the left, and those of us who want to transform the world, because we haven't yet really solidified this infrastructure that we need at the global level to be able to tell our stories and to use art as a tool for transformation, we don't have like the inspiring stories of the world that is enticing to show young people, right? The way that we talk about our work is the struggle, the movement, the fight. And that's just not appealing.
Yeah.
And so we have to be in our joy and our expression and say, yeah, kid, you can be any gender you want to be. You don't have to listen to these things. And in fact, check out these stories about this kid who is choosing their gender, or check out these stories about how this kid is coping with their emotions and navigating this hardship. Kids and teens, they want to see things that they can imitate. And so if what they're looking at is activists who spend 3 or 5 hours in meetings and are working all night and don't have time
Yeah.
to have a social life, that is
It's a
not
very
fun.
bad
That's not fun.
image. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also just not appealing. And so how are we modeling a culture of joy and also a culture of care? Young people are not only facing eco anxiety, they're facing isolation and loneliness, literally
Absolutely.
loneliness,
Absolutely.
because they have been so disconnected from the phone, and they're also getting groomed on the phone to be misogynist, to accept outdated gender roles because that is the status quo. And so how do we model and create ways for kids to have other kinds of culture, whether it's books or films or TV, but also how are we representing that? How are we having fun in our movements? Often our movements are so much about sacrifice and burnout and duty. Are those values that we want to pass on?
Let me make a confession here that I'm a very bad poster boy for the image that you want to create because, you know, growing up in a very repressive society, apartheid South Africa, you dealt with a lot of death and destruction around you. But actually, we laughed our way through it. We danced our way through it. We sang our way through it. I remember when I was giving Fridays for the Future and Greta Thunberg and the folks there the Amnesty's Ambassador of Conscience Award, I said to them, just make sure that the Trumps of the world don't steal your childhood. And then I actually, on several occasions, I've actually said to them, activism doesn't have to be boring. Because even if I look at my own experience, activism gave me my best friendships, my
Absolutely.
best networks, my best learning, and so on. And I usually end up by saying, activism can be very sexy.
Yeah.
And we need to be kind of celebrating that because that is part of the problem, that people join things that lift them up. And that's why the Ricky Rick Foundation for the Promotion of Artivism, that's one of the things we take from Ricky Rick's life, where he was always say, stay shining, stay positive.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you this as we come to the end of our conversation. What would, in this moment, right, where people are freaking out about, all these tendencies that we are seeing, what's your call to action at this point? What would you say to young people? What do you say to elder people? How do we deal with the fact that the communications infrastructure that we are up against, Twitter, X is 100% supporting fascist ideas, and Facebook the same. So how do you pick up people at a moment where the communications infrastructure seems to be so against us?
So first I would say is to choose a few things that you really care about and put energy into those. So for example, for me, I really care about nature. And I've been working a lot with the national parks and with public spaces who are looking to do land back or who are really looking to create access to nature. And so these past few weeks, when the administration announced cuts to our parks, to our national parks, right? And cuts, of course, meaning that they're going to cut the scientists who take care of the elk. They're going to cut the people who go clean up at the camping sites. They were cutting, slashing the Park Service. I was appalled because, I grew up in a cement city. There was no nature. The only way I have learned about nature and seen animals with my own eyes is because I go to parks that have been designated. You know what? The creation of national parks is because the colonizers came and wiped out the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And so we had to create spaces called national parks to protect some of the natural beauty that remained even after the pillaging of these lands. And so these are places where bison live, where mountain lions, bears, where you still actually have conservation efforts that are successful. And so what I did is I made art. This is something that everyone can do, is make a song that you can sing when you go protest, make an art piece to put in the front of your lawn, have people over and bake cookies and raise money to support people who are being impacted, because there's so much that goes on in our head. And one thing that I love about culture is that it's actually about getting out of your head. It's about dancing, getting into your body, making something, right? Creating something. Creation is resistance, because we stop being consumers and we begin to create something that reflects our values. And so I created posters that said, protect nature, protect our parks, parks are for everyone, protect public lands, protect the commons. And I went to the march and people loved my posters and I was just handing them out. And it was such a moment of a basic thing, which is getting together to protest and showing what it is that we want to say. You know, you can show up to a protest without a sign. How do you let the people driving by know what you're trying to say?
Absolutely.
You need a sign. You need your puppets. You need the art. You need dancing. You need to get people in their emotional bodies, literally in their body, to feel the urgency and to join you. And so there's so much going on. There's a protest all the time, whether it's about protecting the public workers or protecting Medicaid, making sure that we're still defending our most vulnerable. And the reality is this administration is overwhelming us on purpose. And so choose a few things that really, really matter to you and get the trusted information and go participate with your neighbors, with your family in things that speak out and make something. Like use your hands and make a sign, make art, make some food, you know, learn a dance, write a song, get your guitar out and counter this dominant message. Because the thing is that these dominant messages are designed to overwhelm us and to dehumanize us and make us feel like we have no power. But we could also create something else. I mean, you know, there's that dance that is all over Latin American that says, El violador eres tú. You are the rapist, right? All these girls dancing against sexual assault. And it was one song, Bob Marley, one song that then people around the world get up, stand up, right? And so finding the power of your voice and then turning that into something that can speak to people, because I can't just read a report to you and move you.
Yeah.
I can give you all the data about a warming planet and it won't move you as much as if I tell you, Kumi, let me tell you a story.
Yeah.
Right? So lean into the culture and connect with people and recognize that our power is in being with each other, not being overwhelmed and getting in the way of this machine, stopping it, speaking out. I am so proud to see how many people are like speaking out. I mean, all 433 of the national parks had huge protests.
Oh, wow.
Like elders, people in wheelchairs. And I was like, wow, who knew that Americans, when you take away their nature, they go off. And so to me, that's a moment to then go talk to all these park loving people and say, hey, you know what? Let's love immigrants. You have a good heart. And just like we protect this land, we have to protect human beings. And so let's talk about it. Let me tell you about my butterfly. My butterfly, which stands for migration, is beautiful.
Yeah.
That's when you do it, right? You build connections like that.
So, on that note, tell us where you're going to be in November this year and what you'll be doing from the 3rd to the 9th of November towards the end of the year,
Yes.
to end off on almost a call to action and an invitation for people to join you and I.
In November 1st, I am organizing a global LGBTQ artist gathering for us as queer artists, as artists who believe that love is love and we can love whoever we want, for us to gather and see and study how the right wing is using their narratives to roll back many of our wins, but also to dehumanize and persecute LGBTQ people around the world. I mean, we're seeing this in Africa. It's all being, the brain trust is here in the United States.
Correct.
So we're going to gather and talk about, hey, what are our narratives? Because we can't just fight back. We have to show people that our world is sexier and funner. And hey, wouldn't it be so cool to live in a world where you don't have to follow gender norms and you can just be free to love who you want to love, and everyone can express themselves in ways that feel authentic to them? That's what LGBTQ people offer us in the world, is the promise of being authentic and to not have to abide by gender norms that have been harmful, that actually perpetuate. We're witnessing gender violence at the global level we have never seen before. Sexual exploitation is unprecedented, and it's because of a culture that has allowed for patriarchy and misogyny and heterosexism and ciscentrism to be normalized. So what is our vision? And so we'll start with that. We'll have a mini convening, and then we are going to kick off global artivism.
And we invite all who's listening to this to join us and be part of it, either online or physically. And Favianna, you are an inspiration to me. Your work is an inspiration to so many. Thank you so much for being on Power People and Planet, and good luck with all that you do, and continue to be the inspiration that you are, because right now we need inspiration and imagination in equal measure, and you bring a lot of that to the public discourse. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And if you would like to know more about Favianna's amazing, brilliant work, please go to favianna.com. And that's Favianna with a V and two N's. I send you a lot of love, courage, encouragement, and I urge you to always say to yourself, the world would be a much more bleaker place were it not for people like you who are willing to resist the idea that the world we live in is the best that humanity can create for itself. Of course, the world we need to live in needs to be much better, much more just, much more sustainable, much more fair than the one that we live in. If you found this podcast useful, please follow us on social media, share the links to people who might be interested, and write us a review wherever you get your podcasts. This goes a long way to keep the podcast running. Until next time, thank you so much for joining Power People and Planet.